This is a replica that I built several years ago of the Gold Lyre of Ur, sometimes referred to as the Queen's Lyre. The original, which is on display in the Baghdad Museum, was discovered by archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley in the royal death pit of the Sumerian queen Puabi, who ruled in the city of Ur in southern Mesopotamia roughly 4,700 years ago. I would like to begin by pointing out that the entire excavation project was a collaboration between the British Museum, the Philadelphia Museum, and the government of Iraq. The treasures that were discovered were divided between the participants by mutual agreement. Unlike the ancient Egyptians, who buried their royal dead in sealed tombs, carefully preserving grave goods and artifacts, the Sumerians simply dug a deep pit, arranged everything and every body neatly at the bottom, and filled it over with earth. As a result of this, everything that was biodegradable quickly disintegrated, leaving only metal, shell, stone, and certain other indestructible materials. If you were to bury a guitar undisturbed in the ground under several tons of earth for 5,000 years, all that would be left would be the tuning mechanisms, the metal frets, and a faint outline indicating where the wooden parts of the instrument used to be. That was the challenge that faced archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley and his team while excavating the royal death pit of Queen Puabi in 1928. Woolley's excavations were very carefully done, with dirt being removed inch by inch so that nothing would be damaged. Here is a photo taken by Woolley on site when the gold lyre and its mate, the silver lyre, were first discovered. All that was left were the decorative metals and mosaics, which had to be meticulously bound together without disturbing them using muslin cloth and wax, and then lifted from the ground where they had lain for millennia. Here is another shot of Woolley and his wife, assisted by one of the many workmen, cleaning and preparing the lyres for removal from the site. It is highly unlikely that any archaeologist today would sit on top of the artifact he or she was attempting to recover, but these were the days of the Indiana Jones School of Archaeological Exploration, and we should be thankful that Woolley took the time and trouble that he did. Just for fun, I thought I'd throw in this photo of Woolley, seen here on the right, with his friend T.E. Lawrence, known as Lawrence of Arabia, who was himself an enthusiastic amateur archaeologist who worked with Woolley on some of his excavations when he wasn't otherwise occupied blowing up trains in the desert. Here is a photo of the original gold lyre as it is today in the Baghdad Museum in Iraq. It has been restored, but it has not been rebuilt, so it is without strings and it is not playable. It is a magnificent work of art and one of the oldest stringed instruments in existence. The restorers first constructed a wooden scaffold and reapplied the mosaic inlays of lapis, shell, and other semi-precious stones, as well as the gold sheeting, in the same configurations in which they were found. When I began to build my own replica of the gold lyre, it was my intention to concentrate on the sound that such an instrument might make rather than the spectacular ornamentation. I based my lyre on Leonard Woolley's original measurements, although the effect of being buried for nearly 5,000 years under tons of earth was the equivalent of being run over by a steamroller. Not only that, the gold lyre was mangled together with 4 other stringed instruments from which it had to be separated: the silver lyre, 2 other smaller lyres, and a small harp. Believe it or not, it took experts several decades to get some of the pieces properly sorted out. Notice the instrument at the left of this photograph. This was Leonard Woolley's reconstruction of some of the bits and pieces he discovered along with the gold lyre, and it was on display for many years in the British Museum exactly as you see it here. It lacks the elegance and design that we see in other Sumerian artifacts and looks more like a Kleenex box with a young bull trying to clamber out of it. Some clever young archaeologist working at the museum came along decades after this instrument had been proudly put on display and came to the conclusion that Woolley and his associates got it wrong. After carefully examining the artifact itself, along with Leonard Woolley's detailed field notes, research revealed that this bizarre instrument that had been cobbled together and put on public display for so many years and had even been featured in scholarly books and articles on Sumerian music was in fact not a single instrument, but two entirely separate instruments. The beautiful 13-stringed boat-shaped harp you see in the center of the photo, and the small, classic bovine lyre you see on the right. When you consider that when these were first discovered by Woolley, all the wooden parts, along with the strings, had long since disintegrated, and the remaining bits were all mashed together, you have to forgive the early archaeologists for making this mistake. They were working under pressure, funding had more or less dried up following the crash of the stock market in 1929, the world was in turmoil, and war was on the horizon. They did the best they could with the resources and the time they had. Now back to my reconstruction of the gold lyre. Here is my original plan, with the dimensions based on Woolley's measurements. From this, I made a life-sized cardboard cutout and used the pieces as templates to cut the wood for the soundbox and the two supporting arms. In the photo, I put an ordinary CD in place of the bull's head in order to give some idea of size and proportion. Lyres are fairly simple instruments, and there was nothing complicated about any of this. Although we do not have an intact Sumerian lyre, we do have a number of depictions of these instruments that clearly show two important factors that determine the sound you hear when a string is plucked. One is the wide, rectangular, bench-shaped buzzing bridge that sits on the soundbox, and the other is the upright, parallel row of tuning pegs lashed to the horizontal crossbar at the top of the lyre. In this wonderfully imaginative Sumerian image made of etched shell, we see a donkey playing a large lyre supported by what seems to be a dancing bear. Two important details worth noting are the parallel upright tuning pegs at the top of the lyre and the bench-shaped buzzing bridge sitting on the soundbox. Here is a detail of a musician pictured on the famous Standard of Ur, playing a bovine lyre also showing parallel upright tuning pegs and the characteristic buzzing bridge. Unfortunately, modern efforts at reconstruction of these lyres have largely ignored the parallel tuning pegs and have chosen instead to use the kind of orbiting levers and wraps with which they are familiar from much later and much smaller lyres of Greece and Rome. Here's the problem. Strings produce their best sound and maximum volume when they are tuned as closely as possible to their breaking point. The strings of Sumerian lyres were made of gut. In fact, the Sumerian word for a musical string is sa, which also is the Sumerian word for gut. The strings of the gold lyre were comparatively thick, unlikely to break, and required a huge amount of tension to get a decent sound out of them. If you are building a replica and decide not to use upright parallel tuning pegs and opt instead for levers and wraps, spooling the string around the crossbar, you will never be able to apply enough tension to get a decent sound from your instrument, because the pressure of the friction holding the string in place will not be enough to keep it from rolling backward as you try to wind it in the opposite direction. You will be forced to use very low tension, which means the sound of your instrument will have all the presence of a bee buzzing under a beer mug, and it will not stay in tune. The Sumerians, clever people that they were, solved this problem by inventing the tuning peg. Let's not forget, this is the culture that invented writing. I'm sure that thinking up something as simple as a dependable tuning peg was not beyond their intellectual capabilities. The only ancient Sumerian lyre whose tuning pegs have survived is the Silver Lyre of Ur, on display in the British Museum, and the reason the pegs did not disintegrate like the pegs of wooden lyres is because they were made of silver. This is fortunate because it is physical evidence of something unique to Sumerian lyres. Careful examination of the pegs of the silver lyre by archaeomusicologist Professor Richard Dumbrell revealed that each peg was provided with two holes, one for attaching the string and a second one, slightly higher up, for inserting an implement for tuning the peg. Here is a photo showing how I have lashed the tuning pegs to my replica of the gold lyre. I have left the implement I use to turn the pegs in place in the peg on the far left. It's just a 5-inch metal rod, and it allows the peg to be easily turned clockwise or counterclockwise. Since all Sumerian depictions of large lyres show the tuning pegs to be upright and parallel, I believe it is safe to assume that this was the way all lyres of this type were made. The advantage of tuning in this way, like a modern violin or cello, is that it prevents slippage and allows the string to support far more tension and to produce a greater volume of sound. The more tension you apply to the string to bring it up to the pitch you want, the more firmly the peg presses against the crossbar, preventing it from dislodging and trying to roll forward. You can add as much tension to the string as you want, and the instrument will stay in tune. We do have ancient descriptions of the sound of the large lyres written in cuneiform script by people who actually heard these instruments played thousands of years ago. We are told that the sound resembled the bellowing of bulls. This suggests that the vibrating strings of the large lyres had a very long decay time. That is, the time from the moment the string is struck to the time all vibration stops and the sound dies. The principle is very simple. You pluck the string and it begins to vibrate, but with each vibration it hits the upper edge of the flat bridge and bounces off, causing the distinctive buzzing sound, and it keeps doing this like a ping-pong ball until all motion stops. It's the bounce off the edge of the bridge that not only produces the buzzing effect, but also prolongs the decay time of the sound. With a low bass string, this effect might be compared to the lowing of a cow or bull. Bench-shaped bridges, sometimes called buzzing bridges, are still found today on a variety of stringed instruments from the tambura and sitar of India to the begana of Ethiopia. I would argue that the presence of the buzzing bridge on Sumerian lyres is evidence that the buzzing sound was an integral part of the timbre of these instruments, and although it may be unpleasant to some Western ears, it was widely appreciated in Sumer. The buzzing sound was also a characteristic of the bray harp, popular in medieval Europe. This may seem like a useless digression, but I have a reason for telling you this, because I think it's important. Here is an illustration showing how each string hole in the soundbox of a bray harp was provided with something called a bray pin, which was a small L-shaped metal shank inserted with the string into the string hole in the soundbox. It could then be adjusted so that it lightly touched the vibrating string, causing a distinctive buzz, whose sound resembled the braying of a donkey. Here is an illumination from the Hunterian York Psalter, painted in England in the 12th century, featuring a singing goat, accompanied, not surprisingly, by a donkey playing a bray harp. One cannot help but be reminded of a similar vignette created in ancient Sumer thousands of years earlier, also showing a donkey playing a buzzing lyre. The buzzing sound from these instruments, since it put out a greater volume of sound, allowed the musicians to be heard over the background chatter of partygoers, drinkers, and merrymakers of the sort that were common to both the medieval festival halls of Europe and the beer halls of Sumer. The natural buzzing effect has been called the ancient equivalent of the modern distortion and fuzz effects added to the sound of electric guitars. As far as the music of ancient Sumer is concerned, we know very little about it. No one knows what melodies they sang or what scales they used, because they did not have a system of musical notation. There are experts who claim to know about the ancient scales and tuning of Sumerian musical instruments, but they disagree with one another. The truth is, no one knows for sure. My guess is that the tuning of stringed instruments, as well as the arrangement of movable frets on a lute, varied from musician to musician, and that there was no set traditional method that was universally used. There are hundreds of clay tablets with the words of myths, legends, hymns, and poems which we know were sung, but my guess is that these works were performed by professional musicians who improvised their performances much the way jazz musicians do today. A distinction must also be made between instrumental music, which is limited by the capabilities of the instrument being played, and vocal music, which not only has the advantage of text, but can change timbre and inflection and perform a wide variety of slides and ornaments over a range of 2.5 octaves, depending on the skill and talent of the singer. I believe that the singers of ancient Mesopotamia could probably best be compared to the traditional blues singers like Lead Belly, B.B. King, or Rosetta Tharpe, who never sang a song the same way twice. Each rendition reflected the moment, the enthusiasm of the audience, and the inspiration of the artist. Most modern singers in countries of the Middle East, Persia, India, and Pakistan still sing in this way. They have a degree of liberty and spontaneity in performance that most Western singers do not have. Here is the first verse of a Sumerian balbale that I am going to sing in Sumerian, accompanying myself on the gold lyre. A balbale is simply a song, and this particular one is a love song between the shepherd god Dumuzid and his love, the goddess Inana, also known as the Queen of Heaven. If you want to hear the whole song and just the song, the link, without me chattering along, the whole song, the link is in the info box below the video. Lubiru. La bijou, la bijou, Lal kukuru kalal amanaru Igi durunabi madug jenin ki